Arizona Territory, 1870. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the harsh desert landscape, turning the rocky terrain into a tapestry of gold and crimson. Florence Landon wiped the sweat from her brow, her once pristine blue calico dress now stained with dust and perspiration. At 22 years old, she had never imagined finding herself stranded in the middle of Apache territory with a broken wagon wheel and dwindling supplies. "This is what comes of believing in dreams," Florence muttered, kicking at the splintered remains of the wheel. Her golden blonde hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, falling in waves around her face. The journey west from Boston had been her desperate attempt to escape the suffocating life her father had planned for her, marriage to a business associate 30 years her senior. Florence believed in one truth above all others. The frontier was no place for a woman alone. It was a place of death, danger, and disappointment. Yet here she stood, having fled one trap only to find herself caught in another far deadlier one. The sun would set within the hour. Her driver and escort had abandoned her 3 days prior, taking the horses and most of the supplies when rumors of Apache warriors nearby had reached them at their last stop. Florence had stubbornly continued with the one remaining horse, determined to reach Tucson and the teaching position that awaited her. Now, as she surveyed the broken wheel and the vast emptiness surrounding her, she realized her stubbornness might cost her life. The desert would claim her, just as it had claimed countless others who dared to dream of a new beginning in these territories. Florence retrieved her canteen, allowing herself a small sip of the precious water. She had perhaps one day's worth left. She looked out across the scrubland, seeing only cactus and rock formations stretching into the distance. No sign of civilization. No hope of rescue. "You should not be here." The voice startled Florence so badly she dropped her canteen, watching in horror as the precious water began seeping into the thirsty ground. She spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. A man stood not 10 feet away, watching her with intense dark eyes. He wore buckskin leggings and a loose cotton shirt, a knife sheathed at his side. His black hair was tied back, revealing strong features and smooth copper skin. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old, and despite her fear, Florence couldn't help but notice his striking appearance. An Apache. Florence had heard stories, terrible stories, of what happened to white settlers who trespassed on Apache land. She took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the small Derringer pistol hidden in her pocket. "This is dangerous land for a woman alone," he continued in clear, if accented, English. "There is much anger between your people and mine. I'm just passing through," Florence stammered, her fingers closing around the pistol. "My wagon broke down. I mean no harm." The Apache's gaze moved from her to the broken wagon wheel, then to the spilled water darkening the sand. Without a word, he walked to the canteen and picked it up, securing its cap before the last drops could escape. "You will die without water," he said simply, holding the canteen out to her. Florence hesitated, suspicion warring with desperation. Every instinct told her not to trust this man, yet refusing his help meant certain death. "Why would you help me?" she asked, not moving to take the canteen. A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, crossed his face. "Not all stories you hear are true. I am Victorio Diaz. My father was Spanish. My mother Apache. I walk in both worlds, though neither fully claims me." The revelation stunned Florence. A half-Apache man who spoke English and had a Spanish name was not what she had expected to find in this desolate place. "Florence Landon," she replied, cautiously extending her hand to take the canteen. "I was traveling to Tucson to take a position as a schoolteacher." Victorio's eyes widened slightly. "Tucson is 4 days' ride from here, with no horse and no water." He left the implication hanging. "I'm aware of my predicament, Mr. Diaz," Florence said, straightening her spine. Even facing death, she would maintain her dignity. Victorio studied her for a long moment, then looked to the sky. "Night comes. The desert grows cold. You need shelter and water." He gestured toward a distant mesa. "My camp is there. You can find safety for the night." Florence felt ice in her veins. Go to his camp? Alone? "I prefer to stay with my wagon, thank you." Victorio shrugged. "Then you choose death. The coyotes will find you tonight, or the sun will claim you tomorrow." He turned to leave. "Wait." The word escaped before Florence could stop it. Victorio turned back, his expression unreadable. Florence swallowed hard. How do I know I can trust you? You don't, he answered simply. But I offer life. The desert offers only death. As the last rays of sun disappeared behind the western mountains, Florence made her choice. She gathered what she could carry from the wagon, a small bundle of clothes, her teaching materials, and her mother's locket, and followed Victorio into the gathering darkness. The trek to Victorio's camp proved more difficult than Florence had anticipated. By the time they reached the small cave nestled in the side of the mesa, her legs burned with exhaustion and her lungs strained for air. The cave entrance was partially concealed by brush, invisible unless one knew where to look. Inside, Florence was surprised to find it almost cozy. A small fire pit in the center, furs arranged along one wall, and various items neatly organized around the space. You live here? She asked, taking in the strange mixture of Apache and white man's possessions. For now, Victorio replied, building a small fire. I move with the seasons. As the flames grew, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, Florence observed her unexpected savior more carefully. His movements were efficient and graceful, his manner reserved but not unfriendly. Despite her fear, she found herself drawn to his quiet strength. Why are you alone? She asked as he handed her a water skin. I thought the Apache lived in bands. A shadow passed across Victorio's face. My people do not fully trust one with mixed blood. The white men fear my Apache heritage. He stirred the fire. I have chosen the life of one who stands apart. Florence sipped the water, feeling it revive her parched throat. We have that in common, then. I too am alone. Victorio raised an eyebrow. You have no family? My mother died when I was 14. My father. Florence hesitated. He arranges marriages like business transactions. I refuse to be sold like cattle. So you ran to the wild frontier, Victorio said, a hint of surprise in his voice. I ran toward freedom, Florence corrected. I'm qualified to teach. I can make my own way. Victorio's lips curved slightly. The desert has a way of testing such beliefs. As night deepened around them, Florence felt her fear gradually giving way to exhaustion. Despite her determination to stay awake, to remain vigilant in the presence of this stranger, her eyelids grew heavy. Sleep, Victorio said, noticing her struggle. I will keep watch. And what of tomorrow? Florence asked, her voice thick with fatigue. Tomorrow we will decide your path, he answered. For tonight, you are safe. As Florence drifted into sleep on the soft furs, her last thought was that she had never expected to find safety in the company of an Apache. The morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cave entrance. Florence awoke to find Victorio already gone, though the remains of the night's fire still smoldered. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he abandoned her here, or gone to bring others who might wish her harm? Her fears were dispelled when Victorio ducked through the entrance, carrying several desert plants and a small rabbit. You hunt in the morning? Florence asked, sitting up and attempting to smooth her wrinkled dress. The desert provides if you know where to look, he replied, setting down his bounty. He handed her what looked like a small cactus fruit. Eat. It will give you strength. The fruit was surprisingly sweet and juicy. As Florence ate, Victorio prepared the rabbit for cooking, his movements quick and precise with his hunting knife. I have been thinking about your situation, he said without looking up. Tucson is far, but there is a small settlement of miners 2 days west of here. They have a trading post where you might find help. Florence felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Of course, he wanted to be rid of her as quickly as possible. That seems sensible, she replied stiffly. Victorio glanced up, something unreadable in his dark eyes. I will take you there. You would do that? Florence couldn't hide her surprise. The journey is dangerous. There are others of my mother's people who would not show mercy to a white woman traveling alone. He spitted the rabbit and positioned it over the rekindled fire. And there are white men who would do worse. Florence shuddered at the implication. I am in your debt, Mr. Diaz. Victorio, he corrected. Only white men stand on such formalities. Victorio, she repeated, feeling a curious warmth in saying his name. They set out after eating, Florence carrying her small bundle, and Victorio leading the way with a quiet confidence that spoke of intimate knowledge of the terrain. As they walked, He pointed out plants that could provide water, rocks that offered signs of nearby springs, and tracks that revealed the presence of animals and other humans. "You know much about surviving here," Florence observed as they paused in the shade of a large rock formation around midday. "The desert teaches patience and observation," Victorio replied. "Those who do not learn die. Is that why you choose to live alone? To perfect these skills?" Victorio's expression darkened. "I choose nothing. The world has chosen for me. I don't understand." He sighed, looking out across the sun-baked landscape. "My father was a Spanish trader who loved my mother truly. When I was 10 winters old, white settlers killed him for taking an Apache wife. 3 years later, my mother's brother was killed by cavalry soldiers. The hatred between our peoples leaves no place for one who belongs to both." Florence felt a pang of empathy. "So you believe you must always be alone? That there's no place where you could belong?" "It is not a belief. It is the truth of this land." He stood, signaling the end of their rest. "We should continue." As they walked, Florence found herself studying Victorio more carefully. Despite his words, she sensed in him not bitterness but a profound sadness, the loneliness of a man who had accepted solitude as his fate. It resonated with her own fears about the frontier, her certainty that she was destined to face its hardships alone. By nightfall, they had made good progress, though the trading post remained another full day's journey. They made camp in a small canyon that offered protection from both the elements and prying eyes. As they sat beside the small fire, Florence worked up the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind all day. "If you despise both sides of your heritage so much, why did you help me?" Victorio was silent for so long that Florence thought he might not answer. Finally, he looked up at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "I do not despise either side," he said softly. "I honor both. My father taught me that every person must be judged by their own actions, not by the crimes of others who share their blood." He added a small branch to the fire. "When I saw you, alone, afraid, but still standing tall, I saw courage. That deserves respect." Florence felt her cheeks warm at his words. "I wasn't very courageous. I was terrified." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Victorio said with the hint of a smile. "It is action despite fear." Their conversation continued as the night deepened, moving from philosophies to more personal revelations. Florence spoke of her childhood in Boston, of her mother's death and her father's subsequent hardening. Victorio shared stories of his mother's people, their traditions and beliefs, and of the Spanish father who had taught him to read both English and Spanish. "Is that how you speak English so well?" Florence asked. Victorio nodded. "My father believed knowledge was power. He taught me that words could bridge worlds." He hesitated. "I have books in my camp. Few, but precious." Florence's eyes widened. "You're a reader. Does that surprise you?" There was challenge in his voice. "It delights me," she corrected, smiling. "Books have been my closest companions." Something shifted in that moment, a recognition between two souls who had found unexpected common ground. As they talked late into the night, Florence felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. They resumed their journey at dawn, making their way through increasingly rugged terrain. Victorio moved with the ease of one born to the land, occasionally reaching back to offer Florence his hand over particularly difficult passages. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. "Storm coming," Victorio said grimly. "We must find shelter." The severity in his voice alarmed Florence. "Is it dangerous?" "Desert storms can kill as surely as thirst," he replied. "Flash floods come without warning." They quickened their pace, searching for suitable shelter as the wind began to rise. The air grew heavy with the scent of rain, and distant thunder rumbled across the sky. There, Victorio pointed to a rock overhang set back from a dry wash. "It will provide protection." They had barely reached the shelter when the storm broke with startling violence. Rain fell in sheets, turning the dry wash into a surging river within minutes. Florence watched in horrified fascination as the water level rose rapidly, carrying branches and debris in its churning current. "We would have been caught in that," she whispered, understanding now the urgency in Victorio's warning. He nodded grimly. "Nature gives life in the desert, but takes it just as easily." The storm continued with unabated fury, forcing them to remain in their small shelter as day turned to evening. The close quarters made Florence acutely aware of Victorio's presence, the warmth of his body next to hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Will we still reach the trading post tomorrow?" she asked, partly to distract herself from these unsettling thoughts. Victorio shook his head. "The paths will be washed out. It may take an extra day." Florence tried to hide her dismay. Her supplies were already dwindling, and the delay meant another night in the wilderness. "You fear spending more time in my company," Victorio observed, his perceptiveness catching her off guard. "No, that's not it," Florence protested, then paused, realizing the truth. I fear that I don't fear it." Victorio's eyes widened slightly at her confession. "What do you mean?" Florence looked down at her hands. "I was raised to believe that your people were savages, that this frontier was only death and danger for a woman alone. Yet here I am, safer with you than I've felt in years." She raised her eyes to his. "It challenges everything I thought I knew." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Victorio reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of golden hair behind her ear. "Perhaps we have both believed lies about where we belong," he said softly. The moment was shattered by a tremendous crash of lightning, followed immediately by deafening thunder. Florence gasped, instinctively pressing closer to Victorio. His arm came around her shoulders, steady and reassuring. "The storm will pass," he murmured, though whether he meant the weather or the turbulence between them, Florence wasn't sure. They remained like that, huddled together against the elements, until sleep finally claimed them both. Morning revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had left the desert briefly green and vibrant, with small wildflowers already pushing through the moistened earth. Their progress was indeed slowed by washed-out trails and swollen streams, but Florence found herself not minding the delay. Each hour in Victorio's company deepened her fascination with him. He was unlike any man she had ever known. Thoughtful, knowledgeable, with a quiet strength that demanded no acknowledgement. When he helped her across difficult terrain, his touch was respectful, yet sent warmth coursing through her body. By the time they made camp that evening, Florence had begun to dread reaching their destination. The trading post would mean safety and civilization, but also separation from the man who had rapidly become more than a guide. As they sat beside their small fire, Florence finally voiced the question that had been growing in her mind. "What will you do after you leave me at the trading post?" Victorio poked at the fire with a stick, his expression unreadable. "Return to my solitary life, I suppose. Does it satisfy you? That life?" He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Until 3 days ago, I believed it was all I could hope for." Florence's heart quickened. "And now I wonder if I have been wrong about many things." He set the stick aside. "You speak of teaching children in Tucson. Is that truly your dream?" The question caught Florence off guard. It's what I'm qualified to do." "That is not what I asked." Florence considered the path she had laid out for herself. Was it truly what she wanted, or merely an escape from what she feared? "I want to build something meaningful," she admitted. "I thought teaching would allow that. But in truth, I fear I'm running toward a life as lonely as the one I left behind." Victorio nodded slowly. "There is a small mission settlement near the Dragoon Mountains, 2 days' ride from the trading post. They have need of a teacher, but few will come because of its proximity to Apache territory. You know this place? I trade there sometimes. The priest is a good man who judges fairly. There are families, Apache, Mexican, and white, living in peace." He hesitated. "It is not grand like Tucson, but it is a place where different worlds meet." The implication hung in the air between them. A place where she might teach. A place near where he lived. A place where their worlds could continue to intersect. "Why tell me this now?" Florence asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because tomorrow we will reach the trading post, and you will have a choice to make." Victorio's eyes reflected the firelight as he gazed at her. "And I find I do not want to say goodbye." Florence's breath caught in her throat. "Victorio," before she could continue, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campfire. Victorio was on his feet instantly, knife in hand. "Who's there?" he called out in Apache, then English. 3 men emerged from the shadows, their leering grins visible in the firelight. White men, roughly dressed and heavily armed. "Well now, what do we have here?" the largest of them drawled, his eyes fixed on Florence. Pretty little thing, ain't she, boys? Florence rose to her feet, terror clutching at her heart. She had heard stories of what happened to women who encountered such men in the wilderness. The lady is under my protection, Victorio said firmly, his body positioned between Florence and the intruders. We are traveling to the trading post at Copper Creek. The leader spat on the ground. Ladies traveling with an Apache? Ain't natural. His hand rested on his holstered pistol. Maybe she needs rescuing. I assure you, I do not, Florence said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Mr. Diaz is my hired guide. The men laughed. Hear that, boys? Mr. Diaz is her guide. The leader's expression hardened. Step aside, Apache. The woman's coming with us. Florence felt rather than saw Victorio tense. I will not ask again, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Leave us in peace. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then the leader's hand moved toward his gun. What happened next occurred so quickly Florence could barely follow it. Victorio's knife flashed through the air, embedding itself in the leader's shoulder. As the man howled in pain, Victorio launched himself forward, disarming him with brutal efficiency. The other two men drew their weapons, but Victorio was already moving, kicking one man's legs out from under him while dodging a wild shot from the other. Florence stood frozen, watching as Victorio fought with a controlled fury that was both terrifying and magnificent. Within moments, all three attackers were disarmed and bloodied, though none fatally wounded. Victorio stood over them, now holding the leader's pistol. Take your friends and go, he commanded. Speak of this to anyone, and I will find you. The men retreated into the darkness, dragging their injured leader with them. Only when the sounds of their departure had faded did Victorio turn back to Florence. She expected to see triumph in his eyes, but instead found sorrow. I am sorry you had to witness that, he said softly. Florence moved toward him without thinking, placing her hand on his arm. You saved my life, and possibly something worse than death. I revealed the savage they believe me to be, he replied bitterly. No, Florence insisted. You showed restraint and mercy where they showed none. She tightened her grip on his arm. You protected me. Victorio looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Florence responded with a passion that surprised them both. All the tension and growing attraction of the past days crystallized in that moment, sweeping away doubts and fears. When they finally separated, both breathless, Victorio rested his forehead against hers. I should not have done that, he whispered. I would have been disappointed if you hadn't, Florence replied, bringing her hand up to touch his face. They spent the rest of the night talking, sharing dreams they had never dared voice before. Victorio spoke of land he had found near a spring in the mountains, where he had begun building a small cabin but had never completed it. For what was the point of a home for one person alone? Florence confessed her fears of the frontier, but also her growing realization that perhaps the wilderness held not just danger, but possibility. I feel as though I've been seeing the world through a clouded glass until now, she admitted as dawn approached. Everything I believed about this territory, about your people, about what my life could be, it's all changing. Victorio took her hand. We reached the trading post today. What will you choose? Florence looked into his eyes, seeing there a future she had never imagined possible. Take me to the mission settlement, she said. I want to see this place where different worlds meet. They reached the trading post by midday. The small cluster of buildings represented civilization of a sort, with a general store, a blacksmith, and a handful of rough cabins. Florence attracted curious stares as she entered the general store with Victorio, but she held her head high, ignoring the whispers. The storekeeper, a weathered man named Jenkins, greeted them warily. Don't often see an Apache and a white woman traveling together, he observed as Florence selected supplies. Mr. Diaz saved my life when my wagon broke down, Florence replied coolly. We're traveling to the mission at Dragoon Springs. Jenkins raised his eyebrows. That's so? Father Miguel's place? He glanced at Victorio with slightly less suspicion. The Padre's got a good reputation, even among the Apache. We need a horse, Victorio said, and supplies for 2 days' journey. Jenkins named a price that Florence suspected was inflated, but she paid without complaint, using the money she had saved for her start in Tucson. As they prepared to leave, the storekeeper called after them. "Lady, you sure about this? Tucson's the other direction. Got proper society there." Florence looked at Victorio, then back to Jenkins. "I've seen what proper society offers. I'm choosing something different." They departed the trading post that afternoon, Florence riding the newly purchased horse while Victorio walked alongside. The next 2 days of travel passed in a haze of anticipation and deepening connection. Each night, their embrace grew bolder, though Victorio insisted on propriety. "When we reach the mission, if your feelings remain unchanged, I will speak to Father Miguel," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "About what?" Florence asked, though she knew the answer. "About marrying us, if that is what you wish." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "I want you to be certain. The life I offer will not be easy." Florence touched his cheek. "The easiest path is not always the right one." The mission at Dragoon Springs came into view on the afternoon of the second day. It was small but well-maintained, with a stone church at its center and about 20 adobe buildings surrounding it. Fields of corn and beans stretched out behind the settlement, and children of various backgrounds played together in the central plaza. Father Miguel, a small Spanish man with kind eyes, welcomed them warmly. When Victorio explained Florence's situation and her skills as a teacher, the priest's face lit up. "God works in mysterious ways. We have prayed for a teacher for our children." He regarded them thoughtfully. "But I sense there is more you wish to discuss?" Victorio glanced at Florence, who nodded encouragingly. "Father, I wish to marry this woman, if she will have me." The priest's expression grew serious. "Marriage is not a decision to make lightly, especially between people of such different backgrounds. The path will not be easy. We understand the challenges," Florence said. "But in the short time we've known each other, I've found something I never expected. A person who sees me truly and values me completely." Father Miguel studied them both, then nodded slowly. "Stay with us for 2 weeks. Florence can begin teaching our children, and you, Victorio, can help with the planting. At the end of that time, if your hearts remain firm, I will perform the ceremony." The 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Florence took to teaching the mission's children with enthusiasm, delighting in their eagerness to learn regardless of their heritage. Victorio worked in the fields and helped repair buildings, earning respect from the other men of the settlement. In the evenings, they would walk together, planning their future. Victorio spoke of completing his cabin near the spring, adding rooms for a growing family. Florence shared her ideas for expanding the school, perhaps even teaching adults who wished to learn reading. Not everyone at the mission approved of their relationship. Some of the white settlers kept their distance, and a few Apache families viewed Florence with suspicion. But the majority accepted them, following Father Miguel's lead in judging people by their actions rather than their origins. At the end of the 2 weeks, Father Miguel called them to the church. "Have you given thought to what I asked? Do you still wish to marry?" Florence looked at Victorio, seeing in his eyes the same certainty she felt in her heart. "More than ever," she replied. "And you, Victorio?" "She is the other half of my soul," he said simply. 3 days later, they were married in the mission church, with most of the settlement in attendance. Florence wore a simple white dress borrowed from one of the Mexican women, with wildflowers in her golden hair. Victorio had traded for a new shirt and had his hair tied back with a beaded leather band. As they spoke their vows, Florence reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since her wagon wheel had splintered in Apache territory less than a month before. She had believed the frontier offered only danger and loneliness for a woman alone. Instead, she had found community, purpose, and a love that defied all the boundaries she had been taught to respect. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Victorio took Florence's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "No longer alone," he whispered against her lips. "Never again," she promised. Autumn, 1871. The morning air carried the first hint of coolness as Florence stepped onto the porch of their cabin, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. The home Victorio had started building now stood complete, a sturdy structure of stone and timber with 3 rooms and a wide porch that offered a view of the mountains. Behind her, she heard Victorio moving about, preparing for his day. They had established a good life in the months since their marriage. 3 days a week, Florence rode to the mission to teach, while Victorio hunted, tended their growing herd of horses, and traded with both settlers and Apache bands. "Beautiful morning," he said, joining her on the porch and wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands coming to rest on the gentle swell of her belly. Florence leaned back against him, smiling. "It is indeed." The child growing within her would be born when the winter snows covered the mountains. A new life representing the union of two worlds that Florence had once believed could never coexist. "What are you thinking?" Victorio asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Florence turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had transformed her understanding of the frontier, of love, and of herself. "I'm thinking about broken wagon wheels and unexpected paths," she replied, "and how sometimes what seems like disaster can lead to the greatest blessing of all." Victorio smiled, the expression lighting his entire face in a way that still made Florence's heart race. The desert teaches many lessons. Perhaps the most important is that life blooms even in the harshest places. As the sun rose higher, painting the landscape in gold, Florence thought of the frightened, lonely woman she had been, clinging to false beliefs about where she belonged and what she deserved. That woman could never have imagined standing here, in this place, with this man, creating a family that bridged two worlds. Her wagon had indeed broken in Apache territory, and what happened next had changed her life forever, transforming a journey of escape into a journey home.